Welcome to worship at Bart Centenary United Methodist Church in Littlestown, PA. I'm your pastor, Tammy Blos, and I'm so glad you came today. Our text today comes from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. Hear the word of the Lord. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why this bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cries of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good and broad land, a land that's full of milk and honey, a place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all live. Now the Israelites' cries of injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I'll be with you, and this will show you that I'm the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they're going to ask me, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am. So say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" God continued, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your ancestors, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God, has sent me to you. This is my name forever. This is how all generations will remember me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Being raised in Pharaoh's house, but aware of his Hebrew heritage, Moses must have had an above-average identity crisis while making the transition from boyhood to manhood. He is, after all, eventually chased out of Egypt and away from his Hebrew people and his Egyptian connections when he flees to Midian after killing an Egyptian guard who was punishing a Hebrew slave. Moses was a Hebrew by birth and an Egyptian royal by adoption, and he was mistrusted by both. Even when Moses flees to Midian, where he is still an outsider. Not a Midianite by birth, Moses is taken in by the Midian priest Jethro and married to one of his daughters, Zipporah. And in fact, Moses is out shepherding sheep for his Midianite father-in-law in the wilderness when he finds himself upon the mountain of God. This is quite a social fall from grandson of the Pharaoh to shepherd. And on this place, the mountain of God, which is also known as Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai, he meets the Lord. In his commentary on this passage, one of my seminary professors, Dennis Olson, points out that in the ancient world, mountaintops were the traditional dwelling places for the divine, and that fire is a common biblical symbol of God's presence. And so, as surprising as it may have been to encounter God, the location and the nature of this God sighting is not as unexpected as it seems to us. Upon encountering the presence of God in a burning bush on this holy mountain, Moses is instructed by God to remove his sandals from his feet. This ancient practice indicates Moses is entering a holy place, a place of divine presence. As an honoring gesture, it recognizes the holiness of this ground, the holiness of this mountain, and the holiness of this God. But there is another possible layer to this command for Moses to remove his sandals. Removing your shoes is also a gesture in many traditional cultures that is associated with entering your home. And Moses, a man set apart and set up by God to do God's will, was a man who was not fully at home in any of the human communities that he was a part of, not among the Hebrews, not among the Egyptians, and not among the Midianites that he now lived among. He was always the outsider. Now, as he is quite symbolically taking off his sandals before God, it is not too difficult to infer some rich symbolism at play in this gesture. Moses, the perpetual outsider, has at last found a true home with the God of his ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. All the men who were also wanderers and pursuing the home promised to them by God. But Moses does not immediately find his home in God and his purpose in the call that God places upon him. Like so many who are called by God, even when called by name, he is not prepared for such a call. When God lays out his intentions for Moses, he, like many others who will come after him, objects in humility and feelings of inadequacy. Moses' first objection, then, is, who am I to do such a thing? I can imagine him thinking, I'm the one who ran away. Both the Egyptians and the Hebrews resent me. They hate me. I am not up to this task. And yet, who is better placed than Moses for this role? The reader of the text will remember God's hand in Moses' life since the very beginning. The hidden and saved infant, the babe who was raised by his Hebrew parents until weaning, who was then received into and raised in Pharaoh's household. The dual identity Moses acquired makes him uniquely qualified to confront Pharaoh in the name of his Hebrew brothers and sisters. And God has obviously placed within Moses a deep sense of justice, a desire to intervene for the victimized and the mistreated wherever he sees injustice taking place. And though a younger Moses may have overstepped the boundaries in responding to this quality, it was placed in his heart by God to enable his destined role. Another of his objections to this call by God was apparently that Moses was unsure of his ability to be a spokesperson for God. This truth has been pondered quite a bit through the years. Readers wonder, did he stutter? Was it a lack of confidence or maybe a true speech impediment? The text does not say. However, we are not the first to wonder about this particular objection, and there was a midrash written in response to this very pondering. This is what the midrash says. Once Moses had become part of Pharaoh's household, the rabbis say the king became quite fond of the young Hebrew, playing games with him and hugging him. Sometimes Moses would take Pharaoh's crown off of the king's head and place it on his own. When the magicians of Egypt saw this, they told Pharaoh that it was a very bad sign, and it meant that Moses would one day rebel and attempt to rule Egypt. They recommended that the boy be killed. But Jethro was present, and he suggested a test for the child. He told them, "This Moses is just a baby. He doesn't know what he is doing. Put before him a gold cup and a glowing coal from the fire, and he will just as likely reach for the coal as the cup. In fact, if he reaches for the cup, you may do whatever you want to him. But if he reaches for the burning coal, you will know that he does not realize what he is doing, and let him live." So they arranged the test, just as Jethro suggested. Just as baby Moses was about to reach for the glittering cup, as most babies would, the angel of Gabriel took his hand and thrust it around the coal. Moses jerked his hand away and placed the burning fingers in his mouth. Not only did he live, but he also burned his tongue and was slow of speech from that time forward. An interesting and entertaining suggested explanation to Moses' second objection. Unfortunately for Moses, it does not work. So Moses tries again. This time, instead asking, "Who are you?" Do the people remember the God of the promise? Do they remember his name? Moses apparently does not, since in verse 13 he asks God, "If I now come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' they are going to ask me, 'What's this God's name?' What am I supposed to say to them?" God's cryptic response to Moses is, "I am who I am," or perhaps a better translation of the name from the Hebrew, Hayeh Asher Hayeh, is, "I will be who I will be." And in this moment, the action of God in Moses' present emerges from the commitments God made to Moses' ancestors. The God of Exodus is the one who remains faithful to the covenant he began with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in Genesis. Unlike human commitments that can waver and fade, God's covenant with Israel remains constant and steadfast. And through that consistency, that constancy, God's identity is once again revealed. God will become truly known to Moses and to the Israelites, as God was known to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob through God's future faithfulness to Moses and the people of Israel. "I will be with you." That is God's promise to Moses. God is here to do the saving. As we read in verse 8 of today's text, God says to Moses, "I've come down to rescue the Israelites from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good broad land." In verse 10, it's God who says to Moses, "So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." God is not expecting Moses to do this alone. "I'll be with you," God says. That's how it's going to get done. We see this time and time again as God calls God's people to God's service, prophets and disciples, evangelists and followers. Even today, this call story is lived out time after time as God continues to call his people. Unfortunately, all too often, we continue to respond as Moses did. We too question, "Who am I to deserve such a call?" Trying to explain to God how God has obviously called the wrong person. "After all, I've done this, and I've been here and I'm not worthy and I'm not capable of doing what you're calling me to do. But these objections still don't fly with a God of grace and mercy. They are not heard by a God who has gifted each of those who belong to God with the power and the presence of God's Holy Spirit. Friend, ask yourself, what is it that God is calling you to do? And know that it can be done. For just as God was with Moses, God is with you. You will not be doing it alone. What God calls us to do is to join us in God's work. And so God is the one who does the work. God uses our mouths, our hands, and our feet, the circumstances that God placed us in, and the gifts that God has given us. But God does the work. All we must do is be willing. All we must do is know that God is who God is and that God is with us. Thanks be to God. Amen.